You ever wonder what happens when you corner a rat? The Galactic Council did. They thought we were pests. They thought Earth was just a muddy little rock begging for scraps at the master's table. When the alien armada closed in, they laughed at our plea for help. They told us to die quietly. They didn't realize that humans don't do anything quietly. This is the story of the day the universe learned why you never corner a human. The waiting room bench was carved from something resembling obsidian, but it held a chill that stone never could. It leached the warmth right out of William's spine. He shifted, the wool of his outdated charcoal suit scratching against his neck. The Citadel didn't do climate control, not for the antechambers. Down here, among the unproven species and the desperate petitioners, you were meant to feel small. You were meant to feel cold. Stop rubbing your thumb, Tom. You're going to bleed on your cuffs. William stopped. He looked at his thumb. The pad was raw, the skin scraped red from running it obsessively over the jagged metal edge of his data pad. He looked up at Sarah. She was leaning against a soaring pillar of pale, luminescent glass, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Her uniform was pressed, but the bags under her eyes were the color of bruised plums. She hadn't slept since they made the jump past Jupiter. None of them had. Just keeping the circulation going, William muttered. He let his hands fall to his lap. They're making us wait on purpose, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, flat rasp. She glanced at the towering double doors at the end of the hall. It's been 6 hours. The protocol manual says emergency petitions are heard within the hour. They know what's happening. They know, William agreed. They just don't care. To them, time is a luxury. To us, it's a death sentence. A creature that looked like a stack of weeping willows cast in bronze glided past them, its myriad limbs clicking against the immaculate floor. It didn't spare them a glance. Nothing here did. To the myriad species that walked, slithered, or hovered through the vast corridors of the Galactic Council, humanity was a rounding error. A loud, dirty little accident from an uncharted spiral arm that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel. William pulled up the display on his datapad. The screen flickered. The data was grim. The Krell, that's what the translation matrix called them. A nomadic swarm of strip miners and scavengers. They didn't conquer. They consumed. They had hit the outer colonies 3 weeks ago. Harvest Prime was gone. Just a cracked sphere of dead rock drifting in the dark. Reach was burning. Earth was next. Humanity's fleet had thrown everything they had at the vanguard. They had cracked the Krell's forward shields. They had died by the thousands doing it. Admiral Cole had rammed his own flagship into a Krell dreadnought just to buy the evacuation transports 40 more minutes. But grit and suicide runs only got you so far against plasma weaponry and energy shields that swallowed kinetic rounds like popcorn. They needed the Council. More specifically, they needed access to the Council's hypergates. It was the only way to evacuate the inner colonies, the only way to flank the swarm and hit their command ships. 5 million, Sarah whispered, staring at her own screen. William blinked. What? 5 million dead, since we sat down on this bench. She didn't look up. Her voice was hollow, stripped of all the panic that had burned itself out weeks ago. Now there was just the math, the cold, brutal math of extinction. Put it away, Sarah. I can't. If I don't watch the numbers, I feel like I'm abandoning them. You're not abandoning them. We're here. We're doing the job. Are we? She finally looked at him. Her eyes were hard, glassy. "Look at this place, Tom. Look at the architecture. It's built to make you look up, to make you feel like an insect. They don't respect us. They barely tolerate us. We brought them trade routes. We brought them our art, our culture, and they shoved us in the corner." William stood up. His joints popped. "I don't need their respect. I need their gate codes." A chime echoed through the cavernous hall. It sounded like shattering glass. The massive doors at the end of the antechamber groaned, shifting inward. A swath of blinding, sterile white light spilled out onto the dark floor, cutting a path straight to William's worn leather shoes. A synthetic voice buzzed in their earpieces, translating the high-pitched hum that emanated from the doorway. "The High Council will hear the petition of Species 899. Proceed." Species 899. Not Earth. Not humanity. Sarah pushed off the pillar. She adjusted the collar of her uniform. "Showtime, Mr. Ambassador." William drew a slow, shuddering breath. He thought of his daughter in the bunkers under Denver. He thought of coal burning in the dark. He tucked the datapad under his arm. "Let's go talk to the gods," he said. The council chamber was a theater of intimidation. It was a vast amphitheater, terraced upward in concentric rings, disappearing into a vaulted ceiling shrouded in artificial mist. Thousands of delegates sat in hovering pods or recessed alcoves, representing empires that spanned millennia. In the dead center of the room, at the bottom of the basin, was a small, unadorned circular platform. The petitioner's stand. William and Sarah walked down the long, sloping aisle. The silence was absolute. Thousands of alien eyes watched them, some with compound lenses, some with bioluminescent slits, some with nothing but smooth sensory plates. William felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure on his chest. They stepped onto the central platform. The moment they did, the floor beneath them lit up with a harsh, unflattering glare. High above, at the apex of the seating rings, sat the Prime Triumvirate, the highest authority in the known galaxy. To the left was a massive, slug-like entity wrapped in shimmering silks. To the right, a being of pure, contained plasma encased in a magnetic shell. And in the center, High Chancellor Xylox. He was a towering mantis-like biped with an exoskeleton that gleamed like polished amethyst. Xylox leaned forward. The movement was sharp, predatory. "Ambassador Hayes," the translation matrix hummed in William's ear. "You requested an emergency audience. You bypass customary tribute. You disrupt the cycle of governance. Speak, and be brief." William didn't clear his throat. He didn't bow. He stepped to the edge of the platform and projected his voice, letting it echo off the towering walls. 3 weeks ago, an unprovoked hostiles force entered Sector 4. They are colloquially known as the Krell. They are not interested in diplomacy. They are not interested in territory. They are exterminators. They have destroyed 2 of our outer colonies. They are currently burning through our defensive lines. In less than 48 hours, they will reach Earth. William tapped his datapad. A holographic projection sprang to life in the air above them, rendering the tactical situation. Swarms of red dots converging on a fragile cluster of blue. "Our military is holding the line, but we are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. We are not asking for your fleets. We know the Council does not intervene in sovereign border disputes. But this is not a dispute. This is an annihilation. William paused, looking up at the amethyst giant. We are asking for authorization to use the Alpha Centauri hypergate network. We need to evacuate billions of non-combatants, and we need to jump our remaining dreadnoughts behind their lines to sever their supply chains. Give us the codes, and we will handle the rest. Silence stretched across the chamber. William watched the hologram spin, the red dots pulsing like a heartbeat. Then a sound broke the quiet. It was a rhythmic clicking noise. It started from the triumvirate and echoed down the terraces. It took William a second to realize what it was. Laughter. It wasn't human laughter, but the cadence was unmistakable. Amusement. Derision. The sound washed over William and Sarah, a cold wave of mockery. Chancellor Xylox raised a serrated claw. The clicking stopped. Ambassador Hayes, you come to us breathless, speaking of annihilation. You speak of the Krell as a cosmic terror. Xylox tilted his triangular head. The Krell are a localized pestilence, a nuisance. They migrate through that sector every 3 centuries to feed. It is a natural culling. William felt his stomach drop. A culling? They are butchering our people. Because your people built your nests in their feeding grounds. The plasma being to the right crackled, its voice translating with a heavy synthetic hiss. You expanded too quickly. You claimed worlds you could not defend. The Council warned your species against rapid colonization. You ignored us. Now, the tide comes in, and you act surprised that your sand castles wash away. Sarah stepped forward, her voice tight with suppressed rage. We didn't know they were coming. The registry files you gave us for Sector 4 listed those planets as habitable and safe. Safe for a mature species with adequate planetary shielding, Xylox retorted. Not safe for a primitive race still relying on combustion and kinetic ballistics. You are infants playing in a dark forest. It is not the Council's duty to protect you from the wolves. We just need the gate codes, William said, his voice dropping an octave. He was fighting to keep his tone level. Open the gates. Let us save our civilians. The Hypergate network is a sacred infrastructure, the slug-like entity murmured, its voice thick and wet. It requires immense energy to realign the coordinates for your primitive vessels. Furthermore, allowing thousands of panicked refugee ships into the inner sectors would disrupt trade, cause economic instability, and spread the Krell's attention toward civilized space. William stared up at the massive aliens. He looked at the terraces, at the thousands of delegates whispering to each other, indifferent, bored. You're denying us, William stated. It wasn't a question. Your petition is denied, Xylox pronounced, leaning back in his throne. The Council will observe a moment of silence for Earth when the time comes. We suggest you return to your planet and make your peace. The galaxy is vast, Ambassador. Species rise and species fall. It is the natural order. The harsh light on the platform clicked off. The shadows rushed back in. We are dismissed, Sarah whispered. Her shoulders slumped. The fight seemed to leave her all at once. Tom, they're going to let us die. William looked down at his datapad. The raw skin on his thumb pulsed with a dull ache. He looked at the red dots closing in on Earth. He thought of the bunkers. He thought of the dark. He didn't feel despair. He felt something else. A small, hard knot of pure, unadulterated human spite ignited in his chest. It burned away the cold. It burned away the fear. William Hayes pressed a single button on his datapad. A secure line opened directly to a stealth frigate parked in the dark space behind the Citadel's moon. He sent a single, pre-arranged alphanumeric string. Execute Protocol Lazarus. "Let's go," William said. He didn't turn toward the exit. Instead, he took 2 steps forward, right to the absolute edge of the platform. He reached out and tapped the console that controlled the holographic projector. The projection of the Krell swarm vanished. "Ambassador," a synthetic voice boomed from the security detail hovering nearby. "You are dismissed. Clear the platform." William ignored them. He kept his hands on the console. "You talk about the natural order, Chancellor," William yelled, his voice rough, cutting through the ambient hum of the chamber. He didn't need the acoustic amplifier anymore. He was practically roaring. "You talk about predators and prey, about infants in a dark forest." Up on the high seats, Xylox paused. The alien's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Remove him," the Chancellor commanded. 2 large, heavily armored guards, hulking creatures with gray, stony skin, stepped out from the lower alcoves, moving toward the platform. "You think we came here to beg," William continued, planting his feet. "You think we came here because we are weak, because we don't know how to survive." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Tom, what are you doing? They'll kill us." "Let them try," William said, not breaking eye contact with the High Chancellor. "We came here, Chancellor, to give you a chance." The chamber went dead silent again. The audacity of it hung in the air. The 2 stone-skinned guards hesitated at the edge of the platform, looking up at the triumvirate for confirmation. "A chance?" Xylox repeated. The translation matrix couldn't hide the absolute venom in his tone. "You stand on the edge of extinction, human, and you speak of giving us a chance? A chance to be on the right side of what happens next," William said. He let go of the console and crossed his arms. "You see, for the last 100 years, since we figured out how to leave our muddy little rock, we've been playing nice. We followed your rules. We limited our weapon yields. We deactivated our rogue AI. We stopped splitting atoms in atmosphere. We put away the monsters we created because we wanted to be civilized. We wanted to sit at the grown-ups' table." William took a step toward the guards. They actually took a half step back. There was something in the human's eyes, a feral, cornered look that translated across all species. "But humans aren't civilized," William said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "We're apex predators who learned how to wear suits. We spent 10,000 years slaughtering each other over dirt, over water, over imaginary gods. We perfected the art of killing long before we figured out how to cure a fever. We are a violent, stubborn, spiteful race." He pointed a finger up at the triumvirate. "You think the Krell are a culling? We survived ice ages. We survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We survived ourselves. The Krell are just another Tuesday." Chancellor Xylox slammed a claw onto his armrest. "Enough of this posturing. Guards, throw them out." "Too late," William whispered. At that exact moment, the massive vaulted doors of the council chamber didn't just open. They blew inward. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a tin can. The heavy metal doors shrieked as they were forced off their hinges by an invisible, localized gravity shear. The delegates in the lower ring screamed, throwing their arms up as a shock wave of displaced air washed over them. Through the ruined doorway marched humanity's answer. They weren't diplomats. They weren't wearing suits. Three figures strode into the dust and smoke. They were encased in bulky, scarred power armor, not the sleek, energy-shielded ceremonial armor of the Citadel guards. This was ugly, brutalist engineering. Thick plates of ablative titanium, hydraulic joints whining with every step, and heavy belt-fed kinetic cannons slung under their arms. The visors on their helmets glowed with a dull, angry crimson light. At the center of the trio was General Miller. His armor was scraped down to the bare metal on his left shoulder. He stopped at the base of the platform, looked up at William, and gave a sharp, mechanical nod. The Citadel guards finally reacted, raising their plasma rifles. "I wouldn't do that," William advised loudly. Before the alien guards could pull their triggers, the targeting lasers of the three human Marines painted their chests. At the same time, the holographic projector in the center of the room flared back to life. It wasn't showing Sector 4 anymore. It was showing the Citadel's own orbit. The collective gasp of thousands of alien delegates sucked the air out of the room. In the hologram, the Council's pristine, glittering defense fleet was suddenly surrounded. Dozens of jagged, ugly human stealth dreadnoughts had dropped their cloaking fields. They weren't holding formation. They had materialized right inside the Council fleet's defensive perimeter, locking physical docking clamps onto the elegant alien cruisers. They had literally tackled the alien ships in orbit. "What is the meaning of this?" the plasma entity on the triumvirate shrieked. "This is an act of war. Your ships are in violation of the Citadel Accord." "We revoked the Accord about 2 minutes ago," William said calmly. He walked over to General Miller, standing shoulder to shoulder with the towering armored Marine. William looked back up at the Chancellor. The mantis-like alien was standing now, his mandibles clicking furiously. "We didn't come here to ask for your ships, Chancellor. We knew you wouldn't bleed for us, but we needed the gate codes." William tapped his chest. "I asked nicely. You laughed. So now we're taking them." "You are insane," Xylox hissed. "Even if you seize the gates, you cannot defeat the Krell. You will only bring their wrath to our doorstep. You are sacrificing yourselves and us." General Miller reached up and unsealed his helmet. With a hiss of pressurized air, he pulled it off. His face was a map of scars, his hair cropped close to the scalp. He looked at the Chancellor with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "We don't need your help to kill bugs, Chancellor," Miller grunted, his voice like gravel grinding in a crusher. "We just needed a shortcut to their nest." William pulled a data spike from his pocket. It was illegal technology, a brute force decryption drive built from scrapped AI cores. He tossed it to Sarah. "Sarah, go plug that into the master terminal. Take the codes." Sarah caught the spike. She looked at William, then at the Marines, then up at the terrified delegates. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. The exhaustion was gone. The math was changing. "With pleasure," she said, sprinting toward the central podium. "Stop her!" Xylox roared. The two stone-skinned guards lunged. General Miller didn't even aim his cannon. He just stepped forward, pivoting on his heel, and slammed his armored fist into the lead guard's chest. The hydraulic servos whined, delivering 2 tons of kinetic force in a fraction of a second. The alien guard flew backward, crashing into a stone pillar with a sickening crunch. The second guard froze, looking at the human Marine in pure shock. Miller racked the bolt of his massive kinetic cannon. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. "Anybody else want to discuss the natural order?" Miller asked. Nobody moved. Up in their high seats, the prime triumvirate sat in stunned, paralyzed silence. They were looking at a species they had categorized as prey, only to realize the prey had teeth. William buttoned his cheap charcoal suit. He walked back to the center of the platform. He didn't feel cold anymore. "We're going to take your gate codes," William announced to the silent, terrified room. "We're going to jump our fleet to the Krell's rear flank. We're going to burn their hive ships down to the slag. And when we are done, when the fire is out and our dead are buried—" William looked dead into the multifaceted eyes of Chancellor Zylox. "We're going to come back here, and we are going to have a very long conversation about who sits at the head of the table." The airlock of the UNS Retribution smelled like stale coffee, ozone, and old sweat. To William, it was the best thing he had ever breathed. He unbuttoned the collar of his suit as the heavy blast doors sealed shut behind them with a definitive mechanical clank. The silence of the alien citadel was gone, replaced immediately by the deep rhythmic thrum of the dreadnought's fusion drives. It was a vibration you didn't just hear, you felt it in your marrow. It was the heartbeat of a species that refused to die. Sarah was already at the auxiliary console in the staging bay, plugging the stolen data spike into a secure terminal. Her fingers flew across the glass interface, leaving smears of sweat on the pristine surface. "Uploading the cipher now," she said, her voice tight. "The Citadel's network is throwing up a dozen firewalls, but the brute force script is chewing through them. It's sloppy. It's going to leave a trail." "Let them follow it," General Miller grunted. He was stepping out of his power armor, the hydraulic servos groaning as the heavy plating retracted. Underneath, his black fatigue shirt was soaked with sweat. He grabbed a towel from a nearby rack and wiped the grime from his scarred face. "By the time the Council figures out how to track the gate telemetry, we'll either be dead or we'll have won." William leaned against a bulkhead, feeling the adrenaline crash begin to pull at his muscles. His hands were shaking. He shoved them into his pockets so the Marines in the bay wouldn't see. "How long until we can jump, Sarah?" "The fleet is moving into position around the Alpha Centauri gate," she replied, her eyes tracking rivers of green code on her monitor. "I've transmitted the override codes to Admiral Hackett. The gate is responding. It's massive, Tom. The power draw is insane. It's pulling ambient radiation from the local star just to spool the slipspace coils." "Tell Hackett to initiate the sequence," Miller ordered, striding past them toward the command lift. "We drop in 10 mics. Ambassador, you're with me. If we're going to burn the galaxy down, you ought to watch the match strike." The command deck of the Retribution was a cavern of focused chaos. Red emergency lighting bathed the room, casting long, harsh shadows across the faces of the crew. Dozens of officers shouted coordinates, firing solutions, and reactor yields over the din of klaxons. There were no holographic projection pits or floating comfortable pods here. Human warships were built like submarines. Everything was bolted down. Everything was gray steel and exposed conduit. William strapped himself into a crash seat next to Miller's command chair. Through the forward observation blister, he saw the Alpha Centauri hypergate. It was a marvel of alien engineering. A perfect, seamless ring of polished white metal, 20 kilometers across, hanging suspended in the black void of space. For decades, humanity had only been allowed to send small cargo haulers through it, paying exorbitant tolls for the privilege. Now, the gateway was surrounded by the jagged, ugly silhouettes of the human defense fleet. 74 warships, cruisers, destroyers, and 3 massive dreadnoughts, their hulls scarred from orbital bombardments and pirate skirmishes. They looked like a pack of starving wolves circling a silver plate. "Gate is active," the navigation officer yelled. "Override accepted. The ring is spinning up." Inside the massive white ring, space began to tear. It didn't open cleanly. Because humanity was forcing a brute force connection, bypassing the Council's safety buffers, the portal didn't glow with a soft, inviting blue light. It bled a violent, jagged purple. Lightning arced from the edges of the gate, striking the shields of the nearby human ships. "Structural integrity holding," a technician reported, gripping his console. "But the gravity shear is off the charts. The gate doesn't like our mass profile." "Tough shit," Miller growled. "All ships, lock down your inertial dampeners. Hackett, take the Vanguard. Retribution will follow. Punch it." William gripped the armrests of his seat. He had jumped through standard slipspace gates before. It usually felt like a mild stomach drop, like cresting a hill in a fast car. This was not that. When the retribution hit the purple tear in space, William felt his skull slam back against the headrest. The air in his lungs was squeezed out as if a giant hand had wrapped around his chest. The ship groaned, the metal bulkhead screaming in protest as unnatural physics tried to pull the dreadnought apart. The red emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the deck into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds, illuminated only by the strobing purple light of the tear outside. William tasted copper. His vision blurred, separating into double images. He felt a profound primal terror, the absolute certainty that they had pushed too far, that the ship was going to disintegrate into atoms. Then, with a sickening lurch, gravity slammed back into place. The emergency lights kicked back on. The groaning of the metal stopped. William gasped for air, coughing violently as his lungs expanded. "Damage report," Miller roared, unbuckling his harness. "Minor hull stress on decks 4 and 7, the tactical officer shouted back, her hands flying across her board. "Reactor output stable. We are through." William looked out the observation blister. The purple lightning was gone. The familiar stars of Sector 4 were absent. They had jumped 3,000 light years in 10 seconds. They were deep in the uncharted territories, the Krell staging grounds. "Radar is clear," navigation said, sounding confused. "Wait, no. Recalibrating sensors. Oh my God." "Put it on screen," Miller ordered. The blast shields on the main monitors slid back. William stopped coughing. He stared. There was no space. There was only the swarm. The Krell didn't build ships. They grew them. The tactical display couldn't render individual targets. The screen was just a solid wall of red. Stretching across the void, blocking out the light of a distant, dying red dwarf star, was a fleet so massive it defied comprehension. They looked like deep-sea leviathans, millions of jagged, asymmetrical vessels made of hardened chitin and dark, porous rock. Some were the size of fighters, darting around like angry hornets. Others were lumbering dreadnoughts, easily 10 times the mass of the Retribution, trailing long, glowing tendrils of plasma exhaust. And in the center of the formation, dwarfing everything else, was the hive ship. It wasn't a vessel, it was a moon, a spherical mass of organic matter, pulsing with a sickly, bioluminescent green light. "They don't see us yet," the tactical officer whispered, as if speaking too loudly would alert the aliens. "They're facing the other way. They're preparing to jump toward Earth's sector." She was right. The massive engines of the Krell Armada were glowing hot, their forward arrays focused on the empty space ahead of them. They had left their rear flank completely exposed, assuming the primitive humans couldn't possibly navigate the Council's hypergates, let alone launch a deep strike offensive. Miller stepped up to the main console. He didn't look terrified. He looked hungry. "The Council thinks we're barbaric because we still use kinetic ballistics," Miller said quietly. "They think throwing rocks is primitive." He turned to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant, let's show them what a very big rock can do." "Targeting solutions locked, General. All ships," Miller broadcasted across the fleet-wide channel. "This is General Miller. You have a target-rich environment. No warnings. No demands for surrender. Spool up the magnetic accelerator cannons. Target the dreadnoughts first. Fire at will." The human fleet didn't have elegant plasma beams. They didn't have energy weapons that sliced through hulls with surgical precision. What they had were Mac guns, massive ship-length rail guns that used magnetic fields to accelerate a 300-ton shell of depleted uranium to a fraction of the speed of light. Across the dark void, 74 human ships shuddered simultaneously. There was no sound in space, but inside the Retribution, the noise was deafening. The deck heaved violently as the recoil of the main gun pushed the massive dreadnought backward. 74 streaks of blinding white light crossed the darkness. The Krell dreadnoughts had energy shields. In the outer colonies, those shields had easily deflected human missile barrages and laser batteries. The Krell shields were designed to dissipate energy, spreading the heat of plasma and lasers across a wide surface area. But a Mac round isn't energy. It's raw, unadulterated mass. It's pure kinetic inertia. The tungsten uranium slugs hit the Krell shields. The shields flared a brilliant, blinding violet for a microsecond, trying to absorb the impact. But the physics simply didn't work. The shield shattered like cheap glass. The kinetic rounds tore into the organic hulls of the Krell dreadnoughts. They didn't explode on impact. They punched clean through. 300 tons of metal moving at that speed turned the internal atmosphere of the Krell ships into superheated plasma simply from the friction of its passing. Through the viewport, William watched a Krell vessel the size of Manhattan simply snap in half. The shockwave of the internal explosion rippled outward, catching dozens of smaller Krell fighters and vaporizing them instantly. The silence on the human bridge was replaced by a collective, fierce cheer. "Impact confirmed across the board," Tactical yelled. "Enemy dreadnoughts crippled or destroyed, reloading main batteries." "The swarm is reacting," Navigation warned. The massive Krell fleet was shifting. The lumbering leviathans were turning, their engines flaring as they tried to reorient toward the sudden threat in their rear. Millions of smaller fighter craft began to detach from the larger ships, swarming like angry locusts. "They're coming for us," Sarah said, stepping onto the bridge. She walked up beside William, her eyes fixed on the display. "Let them come," Miller said. He hit a button on his console. "Deploy the flak screens. Launch all interceptor squadrons. Hack it. Move the cruisers into a defensive wall around the dreadnoughts. We are going to carve a path straight to that hive ship." The human fleet tightened its formation. From the sides of the cruisers and destroyers, hundreds of automated turrets popped open. They weren't firing lasers. They were firing simple, high-explosive shrapnel rounds, millions of them. The space between the human fleet and the Krell swarm filled with a solid wall of exploding flak. As the first wave of Krell fighters hit the screen, they were shredded. Chitin and alien blood froze instantly in the vacuum of space, creating a dense debris field. But there were too many. Krell fighters pushed through the flak, taking heavy losses, and began strafing the human ships. Green plasma bolts slammed into the Retribution's armor. The ship rocked violently. William grabbed a railing to stay on his feet. "Armor plating on Deck 3 is holding, but it's getting hot," a tech shouted. "Keep pushing," Miller ordered. "Do not stop forward momentum. Drive right down their throats." The human fleet was a battering ram of solid iron, pushing slowly but inevitably through the ocean of alien ships. Every time the Mac guns reloaded, another massive Krell ship died. But the human ships were taking a beating. A cruiser on the left flank took a concentrated volley of plasma fire, its engines detonating in a silent, brilliant flash. William watched the blip vanish from the tactical screen. 600 men and women, gone in a breath. "General," Sarah said, pointing at the massive, pulsing moon in the center of the swarm. "The hive ship. Sensors are reading an immense energy buildup. It's a core ship. If we destroy it, the swarm loses its neural command network. They'll scatter." "Can the Mackey guns crack it?" Miller asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, the outer crust of that thing is at least 5 miles thick. A Mac round will just crater the surface. You have to kill it from the inside. You have to hit the central gestation reactor." Miller stared at the holographic map. He didn't hesitate. "Prep the breach pods," Miller said. "Tell the hell jumpers they're going for a walk." Sergeant David Carter didn't pray. He chewed gum. He sat strapped into the cramped metal coffin of an orbital drop pod, the taste of spearmint mixing with the metallic tang of adrenaline in his mouth. Around him, the other 3 Marines of his fire team sat in silence, the red light of the pod casting their scarred armor in a bloody hue. 30 seconds to drop," the automated voice of the pod chimed. Carter racked the slide of his heavy trench shotgun. It was a brutal weapon, 8-gauge, loaded with tungsten flechettes. In tight quarters, it didn't just kill, it disassembled. "Listen up," Carter barked over the comms channel. "The Navy boys are punching a hole in the crust. We follow the Mac round in. Once we hit dirt, we are on the clock. The objective is the central reactor. We plant the thermal nuke, we set the timer for 10 mics, and we run like hell back to the extraction zone. Nobody stops. Nobody plays hero. We kill the bug. We go home." "Oorah," the squad grunted in unison. The deck beneath the pod shook. The Retribution was firing its main gun. "Breach established. Dropping in 3, 2, 1. The clamps released. Gravity ceased to exist for a terrifying second as the pod was violently expelled from the belly of the dreadnought. Then, the thrusters kicked in, slamming Carter back against his seat. The G-force was monstrous. The pod rattled so violently Carter's teeth clicked together. Through the tiny reinforced viewport, Carter saw the hive ship rushing up to meet them. It was a landscape of nightmares. Jagged spires of bone and hardened resin, glowing veins of green plasma pumping through trenches the size of canyons. A fresh, glowing crater marked where the Mac round had hit, drilling a deep, jagged shaft into the crust of the moonship. Hundreds of human drop pods were raining down, steering themselves directly into the smoking hole. "Brace for impact," Carter yelled. The pod slammed into the interior wall of the shaft. The retro rockets screamed, fighting to slow their descent. Sparks showered past the viewport. They scraped against alien rock and biological matter, carving a trench before finally slamming to a violent halt. The explosive bolts on the pod door blew. Carter unbuckled and kicked the door outward. The air that rushed in was foul. It smelled like rotten meat and ozone. "Out, out, out!" Carter roared, bounding out of the pod. His boots hit soft, spongy ground. They were inside a massive cavern, lit by bioluminescent moss that clung to the rib-like arches overhead. It felt less like a ship and more like the inside of a massive dead leviathan. Other pods were crashing down around them, Marines pouring out and immediately forming a defensive perimeter. "Move up! Secure the tunnel network!" a lieutenant screamed over the radio. Before the words fully left his mouth, the shadows moved. They poured out of the tunnel mouths like water from a burst dam. Krell warrior drones. They were 8 feet tall, entirely encased in black, bladed chitin. They had no eyes, only smooth sensory plates, and mandibles that dripped with a highly corrosive acid. They didn't use guns. They didn't need them. They were weapons themselves. "Contact front!" Carter yelled, raising his shotgun. The cavern erupted in noise. Human assault rifles barked, filling the air with a wall of lead. The Krell charge didn't falter. They scrambled over the bodies of their own dead, moving with a terrifying insectoid speed. A drone leaped toward Carter's squad, its scythe-like arms raised to strike. Carter pulled the trigger. The 8-gauge roared. The tungsten flechettes caught the Krell mid-air, shredding its chitinous armor and blowing it backward in a spray of green ichor. "Keep firing! Push them back!" But there were too many. A drone broke through the line, its scythe slicing through the armor of a Marine to Carter's left. The man screamed as the acid ate through his undersuit. Carter stepped over his falling squadmate, pressing the barrel of his shotgun against the drone's sensory plate, and pulled the trigger. The creature slumped, its head completely gone. "No time to mourn," Carter shouted, grabbing the dead Marine's bandolier of grenades. "We have a job to do. Push into the main artery." The human vanguard became a meat grinder. They moved forward not with elegant tactics, but with raw, brutal momentum. Flamethrowers washed the tunnels in liquid fire, cooking the Krell inside their own armor. Heavy machine guns chewed through the hordes. The Council fought wars with pristine energy shields, taking ground meter by meter, withdrawing when casualties reached a statistically unacceptable margin. Humans didn't do that. Humans fought like cornered animals. They took losses that would break a Citadel army, and they just kept walking forward over the bodies of their friends. Carter's squad pushed deeper into the suffocating heat of the hive ship. The walls here were pulsing, organic. Veins the size of tree trunks pumped glowing green fluid toward the core. "Sergeant," his radio man gasped, his armor painted in Krell blood. "We're 2 kilometers from the core, but the tunnels are choking up. They're collapsing the pathways behind us." "They know what we're carrying," Carter said, looking down at the heavy, metallic cylinder strapped to his own back. The localized nuclear charge. "They're trying to trap us. We won't make it to extraction." Carter reloaded his shotgun. He looked at the 3 remaining men of his squad. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted. They knew the math just as well as he did. "Extraction was always a luxury," Carter said, his voice flat. He pointed down the dark, pulsing tunnel ahead. "We kill the bug. We save the rock. Move out." The heat inside the hive ship's central artery was absolute. It baked the sweat into Carter's skin beneath his armor, filling his helmet with the sharp, sour stench of his own exhaustion. The walls around them weren't stone or metal. They were a dark, fibrous tissue that expanded and contracted with a slow, sickening rhythm. Every step felt like walking through the belly of a dying god. "Brooks, watch the ceiling!" Carter rasped. His throat was raw, his voice a gravelly whisper over the squad comms. Brooks didn't answer with words. The heavy chatter of his assault rifle filled the narrow tunnel. A Krail drone, trying to crawl along the upper ridge of the artery, shrieked as high explosive rounds tore through its thorax. It fell, thrashing violently on the spongy floor, its acid blood hissing as it ate into the organic ground. "I'm out," Mitchell yelled from the rear. "Mag empty. I'm down to the sidearm." "Keep moving," Carter ordered. He checked his shotgun. 4 shells left. He looked at the heavy canvas strap digging into his shoulder pad. The thermal nuke. It weighed 80 pounds. It felt like 800. They had been fighting through the dark for 40 minutes. They started as a squad of 12. Now there were 3. The comms channel, initially chaotic with the shouts of 100 different fire teams, had gone horribly, terrifyingly quiet. A few scattered bursts of static, a few wet coughs. The Krell had isolated the human boarding parties and butchered them in the dark. "We're close," Carter said. His visor's tactical overlay was flickering, distorted by the immense magnetic fields generated by the core, but the topographical map showed a massive open chamber just 200 meters ahead. "I can hear it." It was a low, subsonic hum that rattled the teeth in Carter's skull. The gestation reactor, the beating heart of the swarm. They rounded a bend in the artery, slipping on pools of glowing green ichor. The tunnel opened up. Carter stopped. Mitchell bumped into him from behind, letting out a low, breathless curse. The core chamber was vast. It was a perfect sphere, easily a mile across, illuminated by a blinding, sickly yellow light. Suspended in the exact center of the room by thousands of thick, pulsing cables was the reactor. It was a monstrous fusion of biology and stolen technology, a captured star encased in a shell of hardened, translucent chitin. Shadows moved inside the shell, millions of them, larvae. The reactor wasn't just powering the ship, it was incubating the next generation of the swarm. But it wasn't unguarded. Waiting for them at the edge of the platform were the Praetorians. They weren't like the mindless drones in the tunnels. They were twice the size, encased in armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. They held massive, heavy-ion repeaters, weapons salvaged from dead worlds and integrated directly into their arms. "Well," Brooks whispered, "that's a lot of bugs." "Cover me," Carter said. "I just need 30 seconds at the base of that central pillar." "You aren't going to make it 10 feet, Mitchell said, his voice trembling. He raised his pistol. His hand was shaking. "Sarge, there's no cover. It's an open walkway." "I didn't ask for a tactical assessment, Private," Carter said. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked at their faces, he might hesitate. "When I say go, you dump everything you have into the 2 on the left. Draw their fire." Carter grabbed the heavy cylinder of the nuke, unlatching it from his back and cradling it against his chest. He took a deep breath. The air tasted like ash. "Go!" Brooks roared, stepping out from the tunnel mouth. He didn't aim. He just held the trigger down, sweeping his rifle across the platform. Mitchell stepped out beside him, firing the heavy-caliber pistol with methodical, desperate precision. The Praetorians turned. Their ion repeaters whirred to life, spooling up with a sound like tearing metal. Carter ran. He didn't run like a soldier. He ran like a fullback. head down, boots slamming into the organic grating of the walkway. He watched the green bolts of ionized plasma streak past him, close enough to scorch the paint on his shoulder pauldron. Behind him, Mitchell's pistol stopped. There was a wet, heavy thud. Carter didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the central pillar. 50 meters. A plasma bolt caught Brooks. Carter heard the explosion over the comms, followed by a sharp gasp and then static. The rifle fire ceased. Carter was alone. 30 meters. A Praetorian stepped directly into his path, raising its massive scythe arm. Carter didn't slow down. He didn't try to shoot. He lunged forward, sliding on his knees across the slick grating, passing right under the alien's guard. The scythe clipped his helmet, shattering his visor and tearing a gash across his forehead. Blood poured into Carter's left eye. He scrambled to his feet, kicking the Praetorian's leg backward to buy himself a second, and sprinted the last 10 meters. He slammed into the base of the central pillar. He dropped the nuke. His hands were slick with his own blood. He fumbled with the arming keypad. Code 000 destruct. The red light on the cylinder flipped to green. The timer flared to life. 10 minutes. Carter exhaled, his chest heaving. Command, this is Carter. Package is delivered. Timer is active. Static. The radiation from the core was blocking the signal. A shadow fell over him. Carter looked up. 3 Praetorians were standing over him. One of them raised an ion repeater and pointed it down at the nuke. Carter's heart stopped. If they shot the casing, it would destroy the detonator. The fissile material would scatter, but the chain reaction wouldn't trigger. The bomb would be a dud. The Praetorian didn't know what the bomb was, but it knew Carter wanted to protect it. "No, you don't," Carter spat. He reached down and slammed his hand onto the manual override switch. The dead man's trigger. The timer vanished. A solid red light illuminated the dark corner of the pillar. To detonate instantly, he just had to let go. The Praetorians froze. The insectoid aliens tilted their heads, staring at the flashing red light beneath the human's bloody glove. They understood dead man switches. The language of mutual assured destruction was universal. Carter sat with his back against the pulsing, fleshy pillar. Blood dripped from his chin, pooling on the heavy metal of the nuke. He looked up at the towering monsters. He thought of the blue sky over Kansas. He thought of his mother's porch. He thought of the long, dark road that brought humanity to this God-forsaken corner of the galaxy. He smiled. His teeth were entirely red. "Checkmate, you ugly bastards." Carter lifted his hand. On the bridge of the Retribution, the silence was agonizing. General Miller stood rigidly by the forward observation glass. The battle outside had devolved into a chaotic, point-blank brawl. Human cruisers were trading broadsides with Krell dreadnoughts, the dark space illuminated by the frantic strobing of flak screens and plasma impacts. Debris fields were so thick that the navigation systems were screaming endless collision warnings. "Still no signal from the boarding parties," Sarah said from the auxiliary comm station. Her voice was flat, professional, but William could see her hands gripping the edge of the console, tight enough to turn her knuckles white. "Radiation interference from the hive ship is at maximum. We've lost telemetry on all Helljumper biomonitors." William stood a few paces behind Miller. His cheap charcoal suit was rumpled, his tie loosened. He watched the massive pulsing green moon in the center of the alien armada. It looked invincible. General, Admiral Hackett's voice cracked over the fleet-wide channel. We are at bingo ammo on the Mac guns. Fleet integrity is down to 40%. The swarm is wrapping around our flanks. We can't hold this pocket much longer. Miller didn't flinch. He just stared at the green moon. Hold the line, Admiral, Miller said quietly. Sir, we are losing a ship every 3 minutes. If the bomb failed... The bomb didn't fail, Miller growled, his voice carrying an unshakable, terrifying conviction. My Marines are in there. Hold the line. William watched a Krell fighter slip through the defense screen. It slammed into the side of a human destroyer, detonating against the armor plating. The destroyer listed heavily to port, venting atmosphere and screaming crewmen into the void. They're dying, Miller, William whispered. I know, Miller replied, never taking his eyes off the glass. Then the universe blinked. It didn't start with an explosion. It started with a profound, terrifying absence of light. The sickly green glow of the hive ship suddenly cut out. For a split second, the massive sphere was just a black silhouette against the distant stars. Energy spike, Sarah screamed, surging out of her chair. Core resonance is off the charts. It's going critical. All ships, Miller roared. Full reverse. Reroute all power to forward deflectors. Inside the hive ship, Carter's localized nuclear charge didn't destroy the moon. It was far too small for that. But it did exactly what it was designed to do. It shattered the containment field of the captured star inside the gestation reactor. The star broke loose. A beam of pure, blinding white stellar fire punched through the crust of the hive ship, erupting out into the void. Then another. Then 10 more. The massive organic moon looked like an eggshell cracking under the weight of a sun. The silence of space was broken by the physical shock wave of displaced atmosphere and vaporized chitin slamming into the Retribution's forward shields. The dreadnought groaned, the deck bucking wildly. William was thrown to his knees, bracing his hands against the cold steel floor. Through the viewport, the hive ship detonated. It wasn't a fire. It was an expanding sphere of absolute silent annihilation. The shock wave swept outward, catching the nearest Krell dreadnoughts and instantly vaporizing them into clouds of gray ash. The blast radius expanded for hundreds of kilometers, wiping the center of the Krell armada from existence. When the light finally faded, leaving a burned, glowing nebula of debris in its wake, the tactical screens on the bridge began to chirp. Hive ship is destroyed, the tactical officer breathed. She sounded like she was praying. Target neutralized. Look at the swarm, Sarah pointed at the main monitor. The massive, terrifying coordination of the Krell fleet was gone. Without the central neural network of the hive ship commanding them, the alien vessels lost their minds. They stopped firing at the human fleet. Some Krell fighters began ramming directly into each other. Dreadnoughts drifted aimlessly, their engines sputtering out, while others fired wildly into the void, targeting ghosts. They're feral, Miller said, finally stepping back from the glass. He let out a long, slow breath. The hive mind is broken. They're just animals now. William stood up, dusting off his knees. He looked at the tactical map. The red dots were scattering, fleeing outward into deep space, leaving the shattered remnants of their fleet behind. We won, William said. It didn't sound like a victory. It sounded like an obituary. Casualty report, Miller demanded. Sarah typed frantically. We lost 22 ships outright. 8 more are combat ineffective. Hell jumper casualty rate is... It's 100%, General. None of the boarding pods extracted. The bridge fell silent. The crew stared at their consoles. 22 ships. Thousands of men and women. The hell jumpers. Miller closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, the grief was completely buried beneath a cold, hard layer of command. "Recall the interceptors," Miller ordered. "Admiral Hackett, secure the remaining vessels. Transfer crews from the crippled ships to the functioning dreadnoughts. Scuttle the dead weight." "General," Hackett's voice came back, thick with exhaustion. "We need to set a course for Earth. We need dry docks. We need medical bays." "Negative, Admiral," Miller said. William looked at the general. "Miller, what are you doing? We're bleeding out. We need to go home." Miller turned to William. The scarred Marine looked older than he had an hour ago. "If we go home now, Ambassador, we go home as survivors. We patch our wounds, and in 100 years the Council finds another way to marginalize us. Another threat to ignore. They left us to die. They expected us to die." Miller pointed a thick, armored finger at the viewport. "We didn't, and I want to make sure they understand exactly what that means. Helm, lay in a course for the Alpha Centauri gate." "Destination, sir?" the navigator asked. "The Citadel," Miller said. "We're going back." The High Council chamber was in a state of absolute panic. Delegates were shouting over one another, their various languages blending into a chaotic, terrifying din. High Chancellor Zylock slammed his claw against the crystalline podium, but the sound was drowned out by the sheer terror gripping the room. The holographic projector in the center of the chamber was showing the Citadel's orbital space. 10 minutes ago, the human fleet had dropped back through the gate. They didn't look like the sleek, aggressive stealth fleet that had held the Citadel hostage hours prior. They looked like a nightmare dragged from the depths of hell. The Retribution led the formation, its whole scorched pitch black, half of its forward armor plating sheared away to expose the glowing ribs of its infrastructure. The cruisers flanking it were limping, trailing frozen coolant and debris. They were bruised, they were battered, but they were alive. And their Mac guns were fully spooled, tracking the Citadel's pristine, untouched defense fleet. "Order them to stand down!" the plasma being of the Triumvirate shrieked at the Citadel defense commander. "Destroy them! They are a fraction of their strength." "Highness," the defense commander, a multi-eyed avian creature, stammered. "They are targeting the planetary power grid. If we engage, their kinetic rounds will bypass our energy shields and hit the civilian sectors. We cannot stop the rocks." The heavy vaulted doors of the chamber, the ones General Miller had blown off their hinges, remained shattered. The gaping hole in the entranceway was a stark reminder that the room was no longer a sanctuary. Footsteps echoed from the corridor, slow, deliberate. The shouting in the chamber died down. Thousands of alien eyes turned toward the entrance. William Hayes walked in. He didn't have Sarah with him. He didn't have General Miller. He didn't have a detachment of power-armored Marines. He walked alone. His charcoal suit was ruined. The left sleeve was torn, his tie was gone, and there were dried flakes of blood, human blood, on his collar. He carried a heavy canvas satchel in his right hand. The Citadel guards at the base of the tiers raised their rifles, but they were shaking. They looked at the lone human, then at the holographic projection of the scarred dreadnoughts above, and slowly lowered their weapons. William walked down the long aisle. The silence was heavier this time. It wasn't the silence of arrogance. It was the silence of fear. He stepped onto the central platform. He didn't wait for the harsh interrogator light to click on. He just looked up at the prime triumvirate. "Ambassador Hayes," Chancellor Zylock said. His translation matrix couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. You return. The Krell?" "Dead," William said. His voice wasn't amplified, but it carried perfectly in the breathless room. "The hive ship is a debris field. The swarm is broken. Sector 4 is secure." A collective gasp echoed down the terraces. The Krell had been an unstoppable force of nature for centuries, a natural disaster that species simply fled from. William reached into his satchel. He pulled out a massive, jagged piece of black chitin. It was the severed scythe blade of a Krell Praetorian, still dripping with a viscous green residue. He dropped it. The heavy, dense biological metal clattered loudly against the pristine obsidian floor of the platform, leaving a dark, corrosive stain. "We cleaned up your mess," William said. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the delegates of species who had, just hours ago, laughed at humanity's plea. They all looked away. "We paid for it with 22 ships, with thousands of men and women who burned in the dark, so your trade routes wouldn't be inconvenienced." Zylock shifted uncomfortably on his throne. The Council recognizes Earth's sacrifice. We are prepared to offer reparations. We can authorize a reconstruction fund." "Keep your money," William interrupted. It was a gross violation of protocol. Nobody interrupted the High Chancellor. William didn't care. "We don't want your credits. We don't want your pity." William pointed a finger at the holographic projection of the Hypergate network hanging above them. "We are keeping the gate codes. The Alpha Centauri relay belongs to Earth now. Sector 4 is human territory. If you want to fly cargo through it, you pay our tolls. If your ships enter our space without clearance, we will shoot them out of the sky. We are taking a seat at the table, not as a petitioner, not as a client state." "You speak of conquest," the slug-like entity hissed. "You demand we cede territory? You are holding a gun to the head of the galaxy." "I am stating a fact," William said coldly. "You called us infants playing in a dark forest. You told us species rise and species fall, and that it is the natural order." William stepped right to the edge of the platform, looking directly at Zylox. "We are the apex predator in this forest, Chancellor. We just proved it. We don't want to rule your council. Your politics are boring, and your seats look profoundly uncomfortable. We just want to be left alone to rebuild." William turned his back on the triumvirate. It was the ultimate insult. He looked up at the holographic image of the retribution. "But understand this," William said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre that resonated in the chest of every being in the room. "If you ever cross us again, if you ever leave us to die, we won't just break your gates, we will break your entire civilization. And as you can see up there," William gestured to the bleeding iron of the human fleet, "we don't mind taking a few punches to get the job done." William walked off the platform. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't ask for dismissal. He just walked back up the aisle, leaving the shattered scythe of the Krell sitting on the pristine floor, a permanent, ugly reminder that humanity had arrived. The universe was a cold, dark place. But humans were the fire. If you felt the heat of that final standoff and the grit of humanity's survival, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to feed the algorithm and show that real, unapologetic sci-fi still has an audience. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story where humanity fights back against the dark. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that we never go quietly. What did you think of Ambassador Hayes' final demand? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Stay stubborn, stay human, and I'll see you in the next video.